I think you really have to put yourself in people's shoes, and that's when we can really learn and hopefully make meaningful change. But doing that is hard. It takes mental effort, doesn't it? Because we have to suspend what's important to us for a while, and that can be difficult.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Changing Rain. This week's guest is Dr. Tamzin Furtado. Tamzin is a lecturer in human behaviour change for animals at the University of Liverpool. We know that life with horses can be complicated, but I think a lot of the time it's not the horses are complicated, it's the people. And Tamzin works at that interface between humans and their horses. She did her PhD on the thorny subject of obesity in horses, and she's going to tell us about her novel approach, which brought about significant change. We also discuss finding common ground and how important that is in any change initiative. We talk about livery yards and their culture and how that can be changed, always with the horse at the heart. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, please share it and tell your friends. If you'd like to get in touch with us, email us at team@changingrain.com.au or via our social media outlets.
Welcome to Changing Rain. This week we are super excited to have Dr. Tamzin Furtado join us. Tamzin is a social science researcher and focuses on animal welfare, but also equine welfare and human behaviour change. Rather than me trying to muddle through and tell people about you, how about you introduce yourself to us, to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. Oh, thank you so much for having me on. Really looking forward to chatting to you. So I'm currently a lecturer in human behaviour change for animal welfare, and I also never really know how to describe myself. So I suppose if I was going to put myself in a box, I'm a social scientist who's particularly interested in human-animal interactions and the impact we have on animal welfare. But my background's in psychology and linguistics, and then I had a sort of sideways career for a while, learning about communities of practice in global health and clinical research in low and middle income settings, and then transferred to the world of animal welfare, where I'm very happy. So now I work on all sorts of projects, but basically the thread that runs through is anything where human behaviour is at the heart of a animal health or welfare problem, or one health problem really, which is everything. So
yeah. Totally. So, well, I'm really curious about human behaviour change, and it's something that I've dabbled in a little bit. So Can you tell us how do we change our behaviour? Tamzin, just an easy question to start off with.
That is such an easy question to start with. Thank you. I always think the best analogy for me is that I think, as people who work with horses and animals, we're quite adept at thinking about how we change their behaviour. And often, if say we've got a horse training problem or something, it's kind of normal for people to think, okay, well, how can I set up the environment to make it a bit easier? How can I break this down into small steps, hopefully make those steps rewarding or easy? And if I'm getting stuck, then I'll make them easier. And I actually think that that's the best approach, generally speaking, for people as well, tends to be how can we change the environment for success, give ourselves the social support to make the changes small and easy so that we build confidence and feel empowered, and then you tend to get lasting change, generally speaking. Obviously everyone's different, and every project that you work on will be different. So sometimes like legislation might be the best answer, or education might be the best answer, but generally speaking, those kind of practical things about making it small, easy, fun, empowering tend to be the answer, really. If that makes sense.
So you've picked up on one aspect that I'm really interested in particular, and that's that social aspect, because obviously the things that are happening around us and what other people are doing are really influential on the way, the choices that we make, and the things that we're interested in, and the things we're open to and not open to. So can you tell us a bit about, you know, how sort of that social aspect can either hinder or help, you know, changing our behaviour?
Yeah, sure. And I love the research around our socialness as a species and how much that influences us, and we just don't even realize it, which seems crazy. You know, we all kind of think of ourselves as individuals, and of course we are, but at the same time we are a social species, aren't we? And it makes total sense that any social species, so horses, dogs, primates, you know, dolphins, like they're going to have to work together, and to work together you need commonality, you need to understand each other, you need to be able to fit in amongst your peers. So it makes total sense, you know, biologically, that there's a very strong drive to fit in. So there's some great research around this, looking at, this kind of really kicks in when we go through puberty. So it starts around 12-ish for most people. And what I really like thinking about is, you know, when you see kids go to nursery when they're like 5 or 6 or something, they go to a social event and they might wear like swimming goggles and a tutu and like flippers on their feet and fairy wings or something. You know, they'll wear like absolutely anything. It's outrageous, which is great, isn't it? That's so fun. But then as you get older, you start being kind of molded by your peers, and I'm sure we've all had the same experience as you go through school and you start thinking like, oh, I've got the wrong shoes or whatever. And that's what's happening there, is a really integral biological process, that where we're trying to fit in with one another to show that we're part of a group, because that's what gives us safety. So I think it's really interesting to think about that in terms of animal welfare problems, because often we think like, oh, people are just a bit weak if they're being influenced by peer pressure, or you know, they're just following what they see on Facebook. But actually it's a completely normal process, but we can also use it for good. So we can use that quite easily to kind of showcase socially behaviours that we do think are responsible or good. So I was doing a project with some physiotherapists, equine physiotherapists recently, and they were talking about how could they encourage people to take part in like longer term rehabilitation programs with their horses, where, you know, people, I've done it myself, you may sure you have done at some point as well, where you have to do lots of the boring long reining and things go wrong and you get bored and it's raining and you have to adapt your plans because some, you know, like all of those things. And people do follow through with them, of course, but one of the things that we can do to make it easier is to create supportive communities so that people feel part of something, see what other people are doing. It gets viewed as a kind of responsible action, but you also have peer support as well, and that can be really powerful. And I think if we look at behaviour change initiatives across the globe that have been really powerful, like Parkrun is one of my faves, then those are often based on there being some sort of social action or social groups being involved, and it's just such a strong driver of our behaviour, really.
I'm just interested. Karen and I were talking before you came on, Tamzin. We're talking about organisations and committees and boards, and I've sat on, I'm sure we all have sat on various boards and committees, and you come in with your own particular view of what needs to be done. Then you join this group, and there's, again, I suppose, group dynamics at play, and progress isn't made in the same way that you hoped coming in. And I'm wondering, is there something about groups of people together that, you know, where the status quo tends to be reinforced, or what could people who join these groups with great ambitions and plans to change, what can be done in that committee setting? Is there anything, or is there anything can be done to make change happen?
What an interesting question. Yeah, that is a recognised thing. So you probably heard of groupthink, for example, being a recognised thing that we all, you all kind of, your views, even if they were strong at the start, kind of converge around a mean. And I don't know what you guys have run focus groups as well, haven't you? I love running focus groups. It's my favourite thing to do as a qual researcher. But one of the things I really like is by the end, very often everybody seems like they're best friends and like they've talked forever, and you can't get them out of the room because they've like found common ground. So again, it's a human It's a very human thing. I think the difficulty is, as you say, when you come on a board or a group that's supposed to be kind of working towards something, it's so easy for everybody to get swayed and lose the things that are important to them in the beginning. Yeah, I love your question about what can we do about that. It's not something that I've thought about extensively before, but I would say that now that you've asked me, if I was going to run a group or board tomorrow, I think probably some of the things that would be important would be to get people to write down, do a concrete action to start with about the things that are important to them and maybe what their non-negotiables are, and what their maybe like their principles, their beliefs, the actions that they think are non-negotiable, the actions they think you could compromise on, and then perhaps check in with those like halfway through and at the end or something. So if you've got something concrete, then off that psychologically it's a lot more embedded in our mind, if it's on a piece of paper. We're such simple beings, aren't we? So I would probably do something like that, but I guess the facilitator also has a role there. We've all, I'm sure, been in those things where you get some strong personalities and you can feel quite overruled, or like you're not as important, or someone takes it in a direction and you think, yeah, it's good enough, cool. So I think, yeah, and that's a tricky facilitator role, isn't it? So yeah, I would say that, but it's a really interesting question, because you're right, often we don't quite get out of things what we would want from the start, or we end up being kind of molded by everybody. As we should be to some degree, we don't all have all the answers, do we?
But... No, exactly. And I mean, we're generally, you'd hope we are in a better place than we were before it started, even though it's not maybe as far down the road as you had hoped. It is fascinating.
Great question.
Do you think there's a role in that sort of situation, Tamzin, where you start to unpack what people's ideas or beliefs and things are built around? Do you think that helps us understand some of perhaps the barriers to change, or the facilitators for change for that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing is that when you get people together like that, or when you're trying to encourage people to kind of work through their ideas, what's important to them and why, then you can begin to see what's like our kind of inherent beliefs. I'm going to use the word traditions, but that doesn't necessarily have to be like a cultural tradition. It could also be like a family tradition, or just traditions that I myself have built. Like I always walk the dogs before breakfast, whatever, like personal traditions that we've all done that we get very hung up on. Then it's very hard for us to see that things could be done differently. So things that are just kind of inbuilt, like I guess habits really, but they're a bit, I guess what I'm talking about is slightly stronger than habits. So habits, but with like a kind of belief that that's kind of the right way because I've just always done it that way. Versus like our values, our kind of ethical and moral beliefs about what's right and wrong, versus what's easy, and our kind of behavioural, like what's easy and makes sense in the environment. And you can kind of unpick and unravel those, because it's super interesting, isn't it, when I'm sure we've all had the experience where you've always done something because that's just what you were taught right from the start, and then when someone kind of asks you to, they're like, why did you do that? And you're like, oh, I don't know, it's just what I always have done, but it's very important to me because I've always done it. So it's helpful to think that through, and think through what are the things that are, where's it come from, who told you that, who told you to do that, why are you doing it, and how kind of, I guess, morally embedded in that are you. So yeah, I think those groups can be really good for picking out the beliefs and attitudes and values, the sort of environmental things that might be affecting us, and and the kind of habits and traditions and so on.
Yeah, and I think in those group situations, it actually can be very enlightening maybe for people to discover that they have something in common with someone who's, view on the actual topic on the surface might be very different, but fundamentally deep down they've similar views about lots of other things, and it kind of brings people together a bit more when you can find some shared values. So I think there's actually great power in that social coming together, rather than just being the lone campaigner or the advocate out there, which is an uncomfortable place to be. It's much easier to do it if you have people around you who also feel like you feel, and you've gone through that exercise. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, back to that social support, I guess. Yeah, that's so true. And I think in the horse world, we're very good at creating our own small communities, aren't we? And then separating ourselves from other small communities. So a person who's into showing might not feel that they have much in common with a person who's into dressage, even though actually the two things are, that's maybe not a very good example because some people would do both, but someone who's an eventer, for example. So often we separate ourselves a lot, or someone who's into cobs won't identify with someone who's into Arabs or whatever. So I think that getting people to kind of work through commonalities can also be really helpful to see, what are the values that are important to you here? Actually, we often are more aligned than we think. I did some work with a team looking at this with the Grand National and the commentators talking around when we had the protesters at the Grand National, and we looked at the narratives that were being given by the two groups, the animal rights protesters and their supporters, and commentators and people who were pro-racing. And I think what was really interesting is that both sides have the same thing at heart, as you say, Mita. The thing at heart is that people are passionate about horses, but what was really interesting is that so actually there is a commonality there, and everybody wants the horses to be safe, healthy and well and happy, but that the language and the actual arguments being used to unpack that on both sides were quite different. So the animal rights protesters would portray a moral argument about it being right or wrong to use them in that way, whereas the racing proponents would see it quite differently and wouldn't be as concerned about the kind of moral issue of racing in the same way, but would focus on the welfare and the well-being of horses and how good it was often, which meant that the two sides, even though they did have a core value at heart that was the same, were unable to discuss because they're basically just portraying different arguments at each other without kind of focusing on that kind of moral core that's the same. So I think it can be really helpful to unpick what's important, and I guess starting from a place where you agree on something is always good, isn't it? So yeah, it's a much better way forward than picking at what's wrong around the edges.
So Tamzin, I think that's I really love that idea of unpacking and finding that commonality. So and we've talked about it, haven't we, Mita, in terms of even between equestrian sport and racing, it's like they're two different worlds, and there's not that much similarity between them, but of course there's so much similarity, even though we may not necessarily see it when we're in our camp, but it all involves horses and it all involves sport and things like that. But one of the things I would really love for you to tell us about is the practical research which I think you've done on equine obesity. And I think you basically took a lot of these ideas that we've been talking about so far and then applied them in a really practical way. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll try and keep it concise so I can talk about fat horses forever. So I know in all three of our countries we have problems with obesity in horses. And I did my PhD about just that, but from a social science perspective. And the idea was that, we know from a veterinary perspective how to safely diet a horse and what safe weight loss should look like and so on, but the reality is that it doesn't happen in real life, and that's why we've got so many overweight horses, and bizarrely across multiple management styles. So it's not like horses that are turned out, there's a risk factor for obesity, sure, but there's still plenty of horses that are stable 24/7 that are obese as well. Ridden horses are obese, unridden horses are obese. It's not like there's this particular thing that we can pinpoint. There's obviously a wider societal people thing going on here. So so my research was based on that, and the main thing that I found, there's many things I found. One of the main things that I found really is that the problem of managing a horse's weight is so tricky because owners really didn't want to compromise on their horses mental well-being, and felt that most of the weight management options that we traditionally think of do compromise a horse's mental well-being. So things like stabling them, strip grazing, or using a bare paddock, or shutting them away from their friends, using a grazing muzzle. So all of these things seem like negative things, which are quite difficult for people to then see their horses go through. And on top of that, we found that people had a lot of kind of cognitive dissonance about the shape of their horses, which meant that it's quite easy for people to hold multiple beliefs at once, and then about is my horse overweight? Oh, actually they're kind of chunky, they've always been chunky, it's never been a problem before, or it was a problem but maybe it wasn't this bad last year. We all, what I love about our brains is we all hold multiple beliefs, and we are very able to pick at the just kind of use the one that justifies us at any given moment to do the easy thing. So weight management is very difficult and perceived as negative and not fun and horrible for the horse and owner and hard work. And so we go, oh, it can't be that bad, and I'll do it tomorrow. I think it really it sort of hit home as well. I was managing a pony who's overweight just after my PhD, and thinking that actually the interesting thing is as well, there's no one day, is there, where unless your horse gets laminitis, there's no one day where you think, oh my gosh, he's so fat today, I need to put in place my weight management. You can always do it tomorrow. So it's always, because you have to put in place extra stuff, it's so easy to just let it, oh, tomorrow. Oh, next week I'll be less busy. I'll do it next week. We did multiple, so we used a behaviour change perspective to work through that problem and look at many of the factors that were contributing. I've only really focused on a bit of it there, but what we did, one of the core things that we did was to look at how we could have high welfare weight management strategies, which would be fun for owners and also promote good welfare in our horses whilst managing their weight. So a grazing muzzle is a perfect option for some horses and owners. The horse can be out with their friends, they've got freedom, they've still got they can still pick at grass, but for other owners and other horses, it would be really quite poor welfare, and we all have to of course weigh up for our own. So we created a decision-making guide that helps to break down weight management for owners and horses in their individual situation to work out what will work for them, but using more positive strategies, or we're promoting more positive strategies whenever possible. So things like increasing time out with friends, but using maybe a track system, for example, so that the horses have less forage, doing things like riding and leading rather than just riding one horse, riding and leading and hacking out, going running. I actually wanted to start a couch to 5k. I have done it with the pony I was talking about before, like couch to 5k running with the pony, and I wanted to start like a whole, I was like, God, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? You could start a whole group, like a movement. Never got around to it, but there are groups now for like hiking with your pony, where people take their horses hiking long distances, or just out for the day, and thinking about more creative ways that we can manage weight which are fun for owners and for horses. Also promoting things like enrichment. If they do have to be confined, then how can we make sure that their needs are met while they are confined, because that's good for the horse obviously, but it's also good for the owner, and it means you feel okay about it, so you can comply over a longer period. So that was one of the things. We also, without wanting to go on for too long, we also did lots of work with livery yards. We did a follow-up, a postdoc actually funded by the Horse Trust, because we found that livery yards were often a barrier to weight management, but they didn't have to be. So in some places, livery yards were really helping people manage weight, were helping people recognise when their horse was becoming overweight, helping to put in place practical strategies, but often people felt really limited by the options on their livery yard or agistment. So we wanted to do a project to find out why that was and how we can better support livery yard managers to have those kind of creative options that might help people better. And one of the other main things was really around the showing industry, because, and I know this is the case in Ireland and Oz as well, that in showing, often overweight horses have been kind of promoted and been rewarded, and people feel like obesity is rewarded in the show ring. and a lot of, although we didn't actually find an effect about that really, we did find that lots of people were using showing as a kind of, well, they do it in the showing world, so it's their fault. So therefore, we're kind of justified in what we're doing. So we did lots of work with show judges and competitors to reward healthy body condition, and promote healthy body condition as well, which has been a really positive and kind of bigger campaign as well. So yeah, those are just some of the things we were doing to tackle obesity, but from that perspective of thinking about what's good for the horse, what's kind of social, and what will people see as kind of role models, and also how can we make the environment easier to manage a horse within, if that makes sense. Sorry, I've rambled a bit there.
Going back to your livery yard research, were the barriers other owners within the yard, or were the livery yard manager or owner, or was it a combination of both? Or was it a culture in that yard? I'm just interested.
Yeah, it's sort of both. It depends completely on the yard. Most usually people were saying it's the rules that are put in place by the livery yard manager, which mean that I can't strip graze, put electric fence up. I'm not allowed to use a grazing muzzle. I'm not allowed to soak hay. I'm not allowed to lunge in the arena because the surface is too expensive. I'm not allowed to have shavings instead of straw, whatever. Like there were so many things that people said that they weren't allowed to do, and we were just curious as to why yards were kind of set up that way if it felt so restrictive to people. As you rightly say, it can also just be the peer pressure on the yard. So, people say I'm cruel for not rugging my horse, or say my horse looks too thin, so I feel like I have to feed them more, and so on. So, we were interested in the cultures that are set up in those places. And they're so unique, aren't they? Every yard is just really its own kind of microcosm, and everyone's so they become such a kind of all-encompassing world that often it's very hard for people to see that you could do things differently. So I think that's really interesting. They're really fascinating from a sociological perspective, I think, livery yards. But we found that livery yard managers have really poor welfare, actually, and it's no surprise that they have to put in place lots of these rules to manage people, because actually the managing people is really, really tough. The emotional burden on them is absolutely huge, and that they do put in place rules that make sense for them to manage the wider and not the few. So actually, the main thing we found from that project is that if we want to be able, as a community, as a horsey community, to have livery yards which are a defined standard, or we want to improve standards overall, or we want better registration of yards or something, then actually the main thing we need to do is to support yard managers to make to help them to have more of a kind of sense of professional identity, to have better working conditions, such as safety and time off sometimes, and an appropriate wage, sick time, sick days off if they need it, and so on. None of which they have, which are kind of minimum basic conditions in any other industry, aren't they? So yeah, that was very eye-opening for me as someone who's been on many livery yards but never really thought about the lived experience of running one, which does not sound fun.
That brings me on to another question I just wanted to follow up on. The judging in showing, the judges as a group, we see it in the dressage world as well. People are blaming judges. Oh, if only the judges were better educated, if only the judges implemented the rules, things would be different. But judges are human beings too, just like the livery yard owners. Is there anything that can be done to support them, or is that a way of making change?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're so right. I also tell you about the showing stuff. So I'm as far from a showing person as you could possibly imagine. And so when we started doing our project with the showing people, I was like, wow, this is going to be a nightmare. And I othered them for sure. And I was like, oh, I bet these people are all really fussy. I had my perceptions about them, just as I'm sure they had perceptions about me, coming in as someone who likes riding long distances, if I ride at all, and barely grooms to the minimum, and so on. So basically, to sort of in a nutshell, what the project does is to have someone who can condition score effectively, so usually a vet or a physio or a welfare person, in the ring alongside the judge, and those people will condition score every horse in the class and then give a big shiny gold and green rosette to the healthiest body condition in the class. So in some classes that might be the slimmest horse, in other classes there might be many healthy body condition horses, and we would choose the one that's the nicest conditions in terms of health. So we're thinking kind of slim body condition, effectively, but ideally muscled as well. But the idea is to showcase, then everybody sees that this person gets in the lineup. They've got a big positive reinforcement gold rosette. We had a lot of support from the media, so Horse and Hound have just been a phenomenal support with that, which has meant that people feel even more kind of social support and reward for winning that award. And the good thing is that the judges have been very supportive of it, because they felt previously people had done a lot of judge bashing and saying, oh well, the judges just need better education. What are they thinking? They just need to eliminate all the overweight horses or whatever. And to be honest, that's a little bit not to that extent, but I also, when I came into this world, was like, yeah, I don't know what they're doing, but anyway, let's try this thing and just see what happens if we put a little bit of a shake-up intervention in there. So I mean, that the gold and green rosette on its own is not going to change everyone's behaviour and the whole perspective, but what it does do is just provide a little bit of a prompt for people to think a bit differently. So I should say, so this is in collaboration with the Horse Trust and Holdsworth PR, Rachel Holdsworth, who we work together really well. It's really fun. So what we did was we just piloted at a couple of shows, and then we had someone very brave from a major show in the UK, the Royal International Horse Show, down in Hickstead, who said, you know what, yeah, we're going to try it here, which was phenomenal and quite scary for me. And what happened, I think what was really interesting is, so I got to know these showing people and I was standing alongside the judges, and they're very different. Some judges don't want to talk to you because they're busy doing their thing. That's fine. Other judges will have a chat with you about what they're seeing. And I was absolutely blown away and felt how naive I'd been to not have thought about how the mental load on judges is fascinating. And, people should study this in and of itself. So, even often, let's say you've got a class of 35 almost all bay horses in front of you. If you ask me to line them up on fattest to thinnest, for example, or any one thing, it's actually quite hard. You've got 35 horses and you're watching them go around and they all look kind of similar because they're all of a type. And the judges are keeping in their head, obviously not just weight, they're also, for every horse, looking at conformation. They're spotting splints and turned in legs and things that I wouldn't even have noticed, particularly unless they were like really obvious. They're looking at tack, they're looking at movement, fluency, they're looking at the overall kind of sparkle and picture, how well the rider is presenting them. They're keeping all of this in their head for, up to about 35 horses. So it's absolutely no wonder that it's really hard for them to pick out just one thing, the horse's weight and overweight, and focus on that. And the other thing that's really interesting is that we found that actually quite a lot of the classes, when we condition score them, if the owner's happy, we do a physical, we'll touch them, a physical condition score. And actually a lot of the horses, especially in the horse classes, hold their weight very well under the saddle, and so actually you couldn't tell by looking particularly that they're much fatter than they appear, whereas a pony, for example, most of their weight tends to be on their crest and their hindquarters, so it's a lot more visually obvious. So I also think that judges, a judge in a showing class doesn't touch the horse, so they can't be expected to necessarily do an effective score like that. They're just looking at visual appearance. So I think that the mental load on them is huge, and that the expectations that they can just pick out one thing is also a bit unfair. And also when you talk to them, again, we've got this blame thing as well. So this is totally understandable, but we did actually the first year we did a survey looking at, and we were asking judges and show stewards and so on for their confidence in condition scoring, how big a problem they thought obesity was in the show ring. And what we wanted to do was to be able to show impact from what we were doing, to see whether we were making a change. So we thought, oh, next year people will say they're more confident condition scoring, and they'll say, oh yeah, I don't know, maybe like the dream is, oh yeah, you've made such a big difference, it's all changed. But actually what we found is that their confidence in spotting obesity in the show ring and marking it down was very high at the start. And so things like spotting a muscly crest from a fatty crest, they would all mark that they were very, not all, but predominantly would mark that they were very confident in doing that. Whereas if someone who is a vet, for example, goes and views a pony class, they will say nearly all of those are fatty crests, not muscly crests. So actually, we were often hearing that people were saying, oh, I always place the horses down the line if I think they're too fat, but the other judges just don't. So again, it's that thing of not really knowing what you don't know. So feeling like, well, I think I'm doing the right thing. People are getting at me. I don't really want to hear it, understandably. So, whatever. I'm going to keep doing my thing. So using the kind of positive reward was a helpful way of working with the judges and just getting them to see things a bit differently, getting them to, in their own time, they could come and ask us for a chat or whatever, or say, what do you think of that horse, or what did you think of that one? And we've had some great chats with people. And now, having done that, we've just done our 4th year with COVID in the middle, so 5 years, but one was fallow. And we're now so we've had rule changes across lots of the societies to support judges in talking about obesity, but we've also now got judging organisations coming to us to ask us to do condition scoring days on yards, which is fantastic. So we just recently did one for the PRE Horse Society, which was fantastic, with beautiful Spanish and Portuguese horses. We did a great day at the Horse Trust earlier this year with lots of big name show judges and producers, and we have such a great time. We've developed also collaboration with some vets. So Alison Talbot, who's an orthopaedic vet at Lea Hurst, who's been experimenting with using ultrasound to look at fat depth. So as well as condition scoring and doing all the kind of hands-on stuff, we also then get the horse on the weigh bridge, use weigh tape, and then get the ultrasound and look at actually how much fat is on the crest, on the belly, on the hindquarters, and so on. And that's been just so interesting as a way of looking at, I guess, what's beneath the skin. So yeah, sorry, God, I've gone on there. Did I answer the original question? Ugh, you get me on fat horses and I can't stop.
I think that's such a great way to sort of tackle it. So you're almost working alongside the judge rather than sort of putting the blame on the judge and even more burden on the judge. It's a way of sort of buddying up with the judge and showing that there's, you could look at this other aspect and this is how you would judge the show horses on that aspect. It makes me wonder, do you think that approach could work in some other sports, for example, like dressage, not only about obesity, but you could think of other things like conflict behaviours or welfare or whatever, aspect of the horse's well-being that you're interested in. Do you think that approach could work in other areas?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I think it could. The tricky thing is that there's so many issues that people want to look at, isn't there? So it's really hard. We've been talking about. I also, for my sins, do some stuff about rider-horse ratios, so rider size in comparison to the horse. A few times people have Amanda Stoddard-West, who does lots of work on that, particularly has done some awards for best partnerships in that way. And I think that there are times when it can work really well, and that's been really nice at some shows. I think to do awards, I think, is tricky because we couldn't have, award for the loosest noseband, award for the best rider horse pair, award for the healthiest horse, that, like, if we do, you could go on forever, couldn't you? Horse that's not flapping its lips or swishing its tail or whatever. But the collaboration and seeing what other people see and really sitting with them and really seeing what it's like for them, I think absolutely could work. So, I mean, wouldn't that be interesting if you had a non-judgmental approach behaviorist or a welfare person sitting with an experienced dressage person, and they were there really to listen to the other side and learn from the other side, both, rather than to tell each other you're wrong, which is the trouble. Then God, yeah, I mean, imagine what we could all learn doing that. That'd be blooming brilliant, wouldn't it? But I think the difficulty is that so often we want to tell people that we're kind of doing the wrong thing. So I always think my mantra in any human behaviour change project is that I only can think about an intervention or what the intervention direction should be or whatever once I've got to the point in the project where I am so invested in what it's like to be those people that I'm like, well, of course they can't change, because that makes so much sense to them. So like with the livery yard managers, well, how on earth could they put in different rules because they're in this situation, you know, they're so that it's that they can't change. They're in that because it makes sense to them. And with the show judges, you know, once I was like, right, I really understand why it's so difficult for them, then that's when I can. It's hard because at that point you're like, oh, well, I can't make a change then. But like, I think you really have to put yourself in people's shoes, and that's when we can really learn and hopefully make meaningful change. But doing that is hard. It takes mental effort, doesn't it? Because we have to suspend what's important to us for a while, and that can be difficult. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, dressage is an ideal place for that, isn't it? Because it's under fire a lot. There are some things that some people think are very obvious, like horses being behind the vertical, or conflict behaviours, like you said, swishing tails, whatever. Even lameness, some people feel is very obvious in certain cases, and so on. So it's like we're looking. I love things like this where we're looking at the exact same thing and we're seeing just with different lenses totally. So yeah, if we could, but how the difficult thing is persuading people to really sit down and listen to each other and then compromise or come to that sort of joint decision rather than just wanting to tell everyone, but you're wrong.
Yeah. We've all seen the polarization on equestrian social media over the last few months, and I have been at a loss because I'm not from that world. I see these videos. I don't know what I'm looking at. I would love for someone objective to say, this is what they're trying to do here. This is why it's not working. You know, whatever it might be. But as you say, getting that objective person, it's something I'd love. I really would.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I think I find it, I tie myself in knots with this stuff all the time, with, you know, what is like inverted commas right, or are we seeing the right thing, or who knows more than me that I should, who can I go to who will tell me the answer. And it's so difficult because even with behaviour and welfare people, you get such diversity in opinion, don't you? So you know, Mita, I know we were talking when I saw you at the race course the last time, and we were watching horses cantering down to the start, and I know that there would be people, behaviourists I could stand with, who would say, yeah, they look quite happy and chill at this point, and there would be other people who would say, no, I think they're quite stressed. And you know, it's the difficult thing is working out who. That's okay that we all have different opinions and we can take them all on board because we're all focusing on different things, but at the same time, I guess it means we all just have to make our own minds up and keep learning constantly and be open to change. But it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's hard to do that. You know, it's an uncomfortable place to be.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's being open. It's not getting into that fixed mindset and saying, now I know. That's, you know, that's what behind the vertical is. That's what it looks like, and I will see that everywhere I go.
Yeah.
Just open up your mind, open up, and that it's everything, or most of the things we talk about as being issues or not issues, are dynamic. They're not they're not fixed. They're not a point in time. They are part of an overall context, and you really have to stand back and look at that context, right back to how that horse, the foundation training, the rider skill, the tact, you know. So it's not just, that's awful, look at what's going on there. It's step back, and just see what's. But it's as you say, it takes a lot of mental effort to do that.
definitely. And it's hard, isn't it? I mean, I know, I think we've all spoken about this before. Life was so much simpler when I was just your normal competitive person who didn't know any of this stuff and who really cared about winning a show jumping class, my local show. And, oh God, it was just so much easier. And then the thing is that once you start opening that Pandora's box and stuff, then you're like, oh my God, now I don't know anything. I don't know if I should ride my horse anymore. Am I being aversive by putting a head collar on? Yeah, and oh God, yeah. So I've been through all the iterations for a while. I was like, I don't even know that I can do anything with horses. Now I'm a bit more like, okay, I think this is all right. Like, I think that they do get things from their interactions with us, but who knows? We'll have to make a personal decision, don't we? Hopefully we'll just keep changing, because if we evolve, that means, if we change and evolve, I guess that means we're still thinking and learning, so that's good. But
way back when we started this podcast, I used the analogy of a tapestry, that we all weave our threads through this tapestry. And I had this dream, and I probably thought it'd happen around now, that a picture would emerge. But I can tell you, it's a very complicated picture, and we're only a tiny bit of the way there, and our guests are all weaving their threads through this tapestry, and I think it's a really rich tapestry. But gosh, I'm not any clearer now than maybe just a tiny bit, but very compared to where I was 9 months ago. So
definitely. I know for myself, I love the analogy. For myself, it would be like the back of the tapestry, where it's all like this thread. Like, there is there is like, maybe the other side makes sense if you look at it in a certain light or whatever, but there's an impression of something coming together.
Yes. And exactly, and maybe it'll turn into an impressionist type tapestry rather than a pictorial representation. Maybe it'll just be a sense, a feeling. I don't know.
Absolutely. It's interesting times to be working in this field, isn't it? Because I mean, it's just amazing. Like, things are changing so fast. People's perceptions are changing, social license and everything. There's so much we can learn, and it's really interesting. Like controversy-wise, making sure that we're doing the right thing. And I don't think there's any other field that's maybe changing quite as much. So I always use the dog world as a comparison. And I mean, obviously there are many controversies in the dog world, and there are different like factions there and so on. But I just don't think. I think the horse world, for the massive range of ways that we use horses and equids, is just so interesting from that perspective. So just lots of food for thought.
Yeah, it certainly does. And like, I sort of feel like if you feel certain about something, it's almost like you haven't quite thought about it hard enough yet, because the minute you start to really put in the miles of unpacking things, you realise, oh my God, I'm not certain about anything. That's how I feel. And I think going back to that question of seeing certain things, and you're picking up on certain things, and is this right or wrong? And that whole it depends is, like, I think one good test is, well, how many of the things that potentially could be wrong are going on? And we've had this conversation, Mita, like, for example, let's say you've got to give a foal a vaccination. That's obviously going to be aversive, and it is what it is. You need to give the foal the vaccine. But if it's one little nanosecond, one little tiny moment of the foal's life, and the rest of their life is really good, well then the horse has some reserves and some resilience, and they can cope with that aversive event. But if you've got a horse that's got lots of things going on that are really negative, their bucket's empty, and then that needle could be a really big thing in that horse's life. It's those sorts of nuances, isn't it? That's sort of hard to have any there's no black and white or definitive sort of.
That's such a good way of putting it. It depends on the whole picture. And I think that's a really interesting thing about social license, is that often the things that are focused on are the more visual kind of indicators, aren't they? So whip use being a good example, or noseband tightness being a good example of that. They absolutely are important in terms of the horse's welfare, and please don't think I'm arguing for whip use or for tight nosebands, but in the overall grand scheme of a horse's competitive and their whole life, their early life experiences, their weaning, their socialization, their stabling, what happens to them after competition, they're pretty small issues. That doesn't mean they're not important, but they're the things that are more kind of visually apparent to people. I was having this debate with someone recently, like if the public knew all of the things that go on in horse sport, what would be the things that they would particularly, what would then be the things that they focus on? Would it be, I don't know, weaning, or I've got a thing about weaning weaning, or early training practices, or
stabling,
whatever, stabling, yeah, exactly.
If you've seen a horse sort of looking at a wall for a couple of hours, not moving, just totally disengaged, then that's pretty confronting. But you have to spend that time to actually watch it to realise what's actually going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's not tough, like watching something that's really quick and visual in a 5-minute dressage test or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no easy answers, is there? And the trouble is, then there are so many things you could focus on to make them optimum. Then it becomes overwhelming, and you think, we won't focus on that one then because stabling is a bigger issue, or or whatever. So it's kind of hard to. It can be overwhelming thinking of the amount of change that needs to happen, can't it? In some potentially, but I think it's also good to think about how far we've come as well. So,
and I think that I think your example with the judges, I think that is just such a great example of collaboration and showing the power of what can happen when we actually decide to work together, as opposed to
thank you.
That the us and the them.
The other thing that the other thing that struck me about the obesity and the judges, it didn't happen overnight. And it's an ongoing process, and in this modern world we like the idea of the quick fixes.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So there's a lesson in that, slow and steady wins the race. Kind of, you just kind of have to keep plugging away.
Yeah, that can be hard from a welfare perspective, can't it? I know when I speak with vets and talk to them about behaviour change not being something that happens overnight, then often the things, totally understandably, that they'll say is, but there's an animal potentially suffering, or if it's obesity, maybe they're not suffering now, but they will be soon if the person doesn't act quicker. So the difficult thing is, if you take the slow and steady tends to be the sustainable change, which is good in the long run, but that doesn't, as an animal welfare people, what you want to do is to run in and save the animals that are suffering in the meanwhile. So that's hard, isn't it? And obviously there's no line there of like what's right or wrong, and there's also different types of change, aren't there? Some different strokes for different folks. Sometimes people I don't know, let's say legislation or something will come in and change something much more quickly, and that can be really helpful. But generally, if generally on a kind of societal level, then the longer, slower change happens. And the other thing, actually, you mentioned, thank you for picking up on that with the showing thing. The other thing that was really important there that I love about that project so much is that if it was just me, little old me doing it, it wouldn't have worked. And if it was Jan at the Horse Trust, who I work with so closely and I adore, she's brilliant to work with, if it was just her, it might not have worked so well. Like, it worked because there's a group of us coming from different perspectives, and we had the brave David Ingalls, the guy who runs the horse part of the Royal International, was brave enough to kind of stand up and be like, this is a really big showcase, so this will be a big deal. The people at Horse and Hound, Holdsworth PR, who know the relevant stakeholders. So what I really love about it is it's not just anyone coming in and going, right, change this, or right, here's my clever little scheme that's going to disrupt things. It's only work because it's a group of people coming from different perspectives with different skill sets and working together, and I just think there's so much benefit in that, and I love it when that's one of my favorite things about my job, I think, is being able to work with different people in policy, people with comms skills, people who have more of a kind of political strategic oversight of things, and to learn from each other, because we all have such useful perspectives, don't we? So it's really nice that we've been able to collaborate for that one as well. Teamwork for the win.
Tamzin, we have in the studio, we have a genie, and she's great to have around the place because basically anything you'd like to, if you have a wish, one wish, no constraints, no issues about money or resources, she will grant that wish. And in your work, is there one thing you would like to see, one change you'd like to see happen? And the genie would grant you that wish, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, that's a big old question. I wish I had one of these genies. I think if I could change one thing, it would be a mindset change for everyone to, and I'm really basing this on my past naive self. I'm sure I'm still naive, but I am a bit less so, I hope, than I used to be. But as a inverted commas normal horse person, I think we're so, we were talking about the othering and the thinking about issues as kind of black and white and feeling like feeling set in your ideas. And I think what I would want to do if I had one wish would be to just get everyone to have that kind of open curiosity sort of mindset, to question themselves, but really question themselves, and to be open to keeping learning, but not just going to new instructors, but like really thinking about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and are we happy with it, being open to change, I guess. I mean, maybe it's just me that didn't have that before, but I think that's what I see a lot in research, is that we get in our groove, doing our thing, and then we are experiencing that groove, so we're comfortable there, and we don't necessarily move outside it as much as we maybe could.
That's really interesting, because this is me coming to this whole world very late in life, and I myself would think that it's researchers who are surely the most open to change, because their hypothesis can be disproved and they can realise, no, that's not the right way to go, we need to look at it in a different way. And I would have thought that it's us, the mere mortals, who are looking at that research, who are more set in our ways. So yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about researchers getting stuck in one particular groove.
Yeah, well, I think as I guess I was referring to my past self as a horse person, rather than as a researcher. I guess the good thing about research is it does keep you humble, because you're constantly having things rejected, and I mean, it's constant, isn't it? Being rejected and having other people, you have to be open to other people's ideas, don't you? Because otherwise you never get anything published, or funded. But yeah, still, I mean, it doesn't, it's no panacea, is it? We still also have to keep being open. And I do think as well, being in a university, it's still too easy to sit with your research group and not go out there enough, speaking to the actual people who are doing it, like being alongside them, not just interviewing them, but like, being alongside them, or speaking to all of the people around them, and kind of really getting into what's going on and why. It's just all about understanding people, really, isn't it? And then we're so interesting in our many ways. In some ways we're so simple, and in other ways we're so complicated, and I think we don't, it's great when you can kind of
endlessly
really
fascinating.
Yes, exactly.
I think that's such a great wish, Tamzin, and I can certainly relate to being back in the good old days where I just did what I was taught when I was 10, and I didn't think about it too much, and life was very simple. So I can relate to being the naive horse person, and those so-called good old days. So yeah. And even my kids say, "Oh, Mum, we liked it better before."
Really, today. Yeah. Well, it's an easier time. There's still a part of me that would love to just go back and do that again. But I think it's better to it's better to grow, because I definitely didn't do things as as well as I maybe could have done with more knowledge. So
well, I think we're all involved with horses because we have that fundamental deep love and affection for them. So what we're doing is important for them. So that means we have to be that curious, open-minded person, even if there are times when it is a bit uncomfortable. I'm with you too. I'd go back to those old days sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I don't know. Dreaming of the good old days, is that where we should finish our conversation today?
No,
No, wait.
no. We're talking about
what was meant to happen.
the bright new future,
The enlightened future.
That we're all. No, I really do. I'm, I have, as I say, came to this very late. I'm so heartened by so much work by so many good people, all striving to improve things for horses. I think it's wonderful. It's a great time to be involved, and so I'm positive. I'm optimistic. I'm saying let's keep going in this new direction, and we get strength from each other as well. I think we, from touching base and checking in and
Isn't it when you hear people who have had those changes of directions, and I mean yours is a perfect example of that, Mita. It's so interesting to hear someone in your position, having done your job for 30 years, and then to at that point think like, actually think a bit differently about it. And so I don't know, I love hearing people's different stories, but I think it's inspiring for all of us to hear the range of different perspectives and different ways that we've all changed and adapted and so on. So
so that's a good note on which to end. A positive note. Thanks so much, Tamzin. We really enjoyed the chat, and
thank you.
I've been looking at my body condition scoring now and thinking about you.
Every time you see a fat horse.
I was going to say, I think when I'm having a shower, I'll be thinking of my body condition score.
I do prod my ribs sometimes.
4 years of research has not been kind to my body condition score.
Research is not good for too many biscuits. Too much
yes, that's it.
It's the same.
Yeah. Oh, no, thank you, Tamzin. Did we talk about the elephant that you wanted to talk about?
Oh, no, we didn't, but it's fine. It's fine. I think we're fine.
Okay,
right. Sorry.
Yeah.
No. Let me just stop
it was
this
so
here.
good, Tamzin. I